Hello everyone, and welcome to the third episode of the playlist on Shadow of the Colossus. In this video I am going to discuss the context surrounding Shadow, the most relevant turning points for contemporary Japan, and their impact for the EBT discussion in the second lost decade. Let's go, we're taking off. Meow, 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 meow. In Japan, interest in death has been a recurrent but fluctuating phenomenon. We talked in the previous video about its discussion through the EBT theme, but the central or relevant place of death in Japanese discourses has got its ups and downs. In the decades in which I am going to focus, death returns after a post-war period of general optimism, frenetic consumerism, and popular political activism. Why and how did death come back? In the year 1989, the Emperor Showa died. During his era, major milestones in Japanese history occurred, such as the war with China of 1937-1945, the Pacific War against the Allies, the defeat of 1945, and the following occupation and post-war period. Showa's passing away marked the end of an era, and not only because the Japanese calendar is based on who is in the throne, and that emperor gives the name of that current era, but the death of the emperor also signaled the end of the economic miracle and the general optimism of Japan. Letters talking and discussing death and decadence populated national newspapers. Following the circularity of time, the Japanese discussed about a moment of birth, of maturity, and one of decadence. That is the time that the Heisei era inaugurated. Furthermore, many elders reflected on their own mortality, seeing their better years fading away. On top of that, it was in that year that the economic bubble created for almost 2 decades burst open in a huge recession and economic crisis that will haunt Japan until today. I am not going to expand on the Japanese recession, for I argue the following crises of Japanese society and culture that came in the mid-90s were much relevant for the EBT. What are these hits? These injuries which scars are still present in Japan? First of all, in 1994, the city of Kobe suffered one of the worst earthquakes of contemporary Japan. The city was destroyed, and as bad as that was, both the central and local governments were incapable of relieving the pain and suffering of the survivors. Many were left without shelter, water, or any security. It was up to the people to organize. For instance, it was the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia, which opened kitchens and provided food and aid to those suffering from the disaster. The hit from the earthquake was great, but the lack of trust in the government and the feeling of its great inoperacy left deep scars in Japan. A year later, and motivated by the earthquake, a group belonging to the new religious cult Shinriko released gasoline in the underground trains of Tokyo. The terrorist attack shocked the whole Japan, a country that after 1945 believed in its internal national safety. The incident was complex and hardly understood by a public misinformed by a sensationalist media. Only a small group within the cult knew about the terrorist plans of Om's guru, who believed his own paranoias about a conspiracy between the USA and the Japanese government to create a series of artificial earthquakes. The story is much more complicated than that, and whoa, there was Hannah, my dog, sorry. And so were the consequences of Om's attacks for Japan, for the relation between the Japanese and the different religions in the country, and for the already weak trust in the government, the police, and overall the authority of the establishment. In that regard, we reach the last big shock of 1990s Japan, once again in the city of Kobe. In the year 1997, the dismembered body of a student appeared in front of his school. The body was accompanied by a letter that stated that the game with the police began. The boy was eventually arrested, the killer, and he confessed the murder of also a 10-year-old girl of the same school. The murderer, known as Sonen A, or Young A, wrote a letter in which he explained the reasons for his crimes, blaming the schooling system, adults, and overall the Japanese system that had made his existence unbearably transparent. It was only through experiencing the materiality of death, how a dead body, a corpse, could be manipulated, that Son A was able to relieve some of the pain of his transparent existence. What the Son A letter and its impact in Japanese society and public opinion shows is the verification of the general feeling of uncertainty, ontological anxiety, and experiencing that everything solid was melting into air, becoming liquid, intangible, elusive, and insecure. Every boundary, every category, every ideal or concept is apt to disappear, to become transparent. Life is then unbearable as security vanishes. Nothing is stable, nothing remains. So how to live in this world? How to survive a time that is erasing us? That is, I argue, when the EBT comes up. Stories about testing, challenging, and interrogating the most essential and ultimate boundary, that separates and connects the end of life, and the beginning of something else, something non-elusive and seemingly eternal. So the EBT in the second lost decade follows the logic of the 1990s interrogations on every boundary. It is the same attempt, now through visual media, to find something solid after experiencing every dimension of the boundaries that are transgressed. Because that is transgression, not only to rebel against a norm, but also the only way to fully experience it. That is what Sado proposes. That is what the EBT in that decade is about. But how is this existential inquiry performed and represented in the game? To answer that question, I will dedicate the next videos to an exploration on Sado's ludic, aesthetic, and narrative dimensions. For now, the following episode presents different accounts, arguments, and approaches to Sado. I will thus introduce what others before me had said about the game, and I will discuss with these sources proposing a new approach to the game to study the EBT theme that structures its gameplay. That is all from me now. Hope this episode wasn't too dark. Please drop a comment if there's anything you would like to ask, add, or anything else. Thank you once again for your time and your patience, and see you soon, Astro Cats. Something for your